Okay, the last part of this lecture will be a quick review of some more findings from the risk perception and risk heuristics literature. Then I want to introduce risk homeostasis theory, the notion of risk adjustment, and risk compensation. First, let me just review some of the research findings I want to draw to your attention from your readings, in particular the Schneer 2008 article. He reviews a lot of the risk perception literature and has a table of different summary findings. I want to draw your attention to some of them that I think are most significant here. So this is just sort of summarizing, highlighting what you might have read in your readings, but also relates somewhat to our discussion of heuristics earlier in this unit. First, people exaggerate spectacular but rare risks and downplay common risks. This is an aspect of the availability heuristic. We are more concerned about terror attacks and car accidents. That was my example earlier. Also, another example, a high-profile computer virus attack will draw attention. The hidden attack that's going to strike and that media picks up on. That would draw our attention, but the mundane, common phishing threats are ignored because they're just not as vivid or salient. Second, common repeatable finding is that people underestimate risks they willingly take and overestimate risks in situations they can't control. This sort of combines the affect heuristic, the optimism bias, and illusion of control. The classic example here is driving versus flying. Driving is actually riskier than flying, but willingly take control of the wheel, but we really can't control the airplane that we're flying in. So people often will perceive greater risks flying than driving. Another example, people are comfortable with computers and they downplay the riskiness of their behavior. How harmful can this website be? How harmful can this link be? That something that they do on a routine basis, that fully under their control. So as a result of these controlled, effortful actions, they don't perceive risks, and they're likely to expose their computers to serious threat and harm, or at least underestimate their exposure. Third, most people are less afraid of a risk they choose to take than the risk imposed on them. Okay, similar to the previous one, and I guess the slight distinction is that if you choose to fly, you're going to see less risk than if you're forced to fly. Cognitive dissonance and hedonic balance come into play here. Cognitive dissonance, most people are familiar with that term, psychological term, but if not, it's just the notion that people seek consistency in thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors. We want to align what we believe, what we feel, and how we behave. So, for example, I'm a reasonable person. I don't take excessive risks. If I choose to do something, it must not be risky. Those are balanced thoughts. Cigarette smoking is another example of cognitive dissonance. We know that cigarette smoking is harmful, but the cigarette smoker discounts the risk to him or herself. To keep aligned with the perception of themselves as reasonable, safe people. So in the computer realm, people will choose to surf the web, download files or whatever. They do this routinely, they choose to do so, so they'll downplay the risk associated with their actions. Next, personified risks are perceived to be greater than anonymous risks. This sort of ties in the representativeness heuristic as well as availability heuristic. The example that I think Schneer used, and maybe it was Adams, but I think it was Schneer, was the survey of national park users perceived greater danger from thieves than from deer, although the actual danger is greater for a car accident, so hitting a deer in the national parks. Okay, personified risk is someone's going to do something to you. Okay, sort of as an anonymous risk, some random deer running in front of your car. Think about how much people spend on home security systems, burglar alarms, okay, versus environmental safety systems like radon removal or radon detection. Radon is a hidden anonymous risk, whereas that burglar, it's a personified risk. So it's more likely to draw our attention. Same thing with computer safety. It's seen as an anonymous risk. It's something that is often discounted. Next, people have trouble estimating risk for anything not exactly like their normal situation. This is a situation of uncertainty, ambiguity. You can also think of these situations as ones in which we have not developed the expertise to even make the intuitive judgments. Go back to the discussion of intuitive thought and judgments, and that we had said that some of our intuition is the result of experience. And so system one judgments based on experience may actually be reasonably effective. But if we don't have familiarity, we're not going to have the experience to have sound intuitive judgments. And our intuition on uncertainty is going to be biased for all the heuristic reasons we've already looked at. In terms of information or computer security, the university is a good example. The average student, and even more so the average faculty member, does not comprehend networks and computer systems, so does not understand the risk that his or her internet and computer activity poses to the university's system. Next point. Most people are more afraid of risks that are new than those they lived with for a while. This is somewhat related to the previous point as well as some earlier ones. This reflects the notion of the change in the status quo and habituation. For example, West Nile virus or the swine flu virus, these new epidemics that always are coming up certainly grab our attention because they're new. We don't know how to handle them, and hence they're more salient or potentially more vivid. I guess for those old enough to remember the old Y2K bug, boy, that caught everyone's attention, and we were counting down to the year 2000, New Year's Day 2000, when all the computers would just cease to work because no one had fixed the Y2K bug. Obviously, way overblown. But more generally, novelty always captures our attention. Something new is scrutinized. It's assimilated, if possible, into existing knowledge. But until it is assimilated, it stays salient in our minds and dominates our thoughts. Over time and exposure, habituation is going to occur. Okay, so the longer we live the potential threat, the less threatening it becomes. Just think about Californians and living with earthquakes. Possibility of earthquakes, that is. Last two findings that I wanted to emphasize and bring to your attention. First is most people are less afraid of risks that are natural than those that are handmade. Earthquakes and storms don't really bother us as much as criminals or viruses that are created by criminals. Cyber attacks would actually be seen as more risky than the natural risk as well. I guess even more everyday occurrence. People are more likely to be afraid of computer viruses, something that's man-made, than power surges, although both will do damage to the computers. Finally, risk is inversely related to the amount of control one experiences. This, I think, is a good general point. Think driving versus flying. Even think driving versus sitting in the passenger seat. If you're sitting in the passenger seat during a blizzard, you're probably feeling more nervous, more anxiety, more fearful than the person actually driving, although that person may also be feeling fear. The fact is that you don't have control. When we don't have control over an activity that we are skilled to do, we are likely to perceive greater risk than if we actually do have control of it. Part of this relates to the optimism bias that Schneer talks about, as well as the illusion of control. So similar to earlier points, people are less likely to perceive risk when they are in the control of activities. Also think about how we experience control over our computer activities and internet behavior. This is something that we feel skilled at, we feel is totally underneath our control, and thus likely to be less vigilant for threats coming over the internet. Okay, but one thing's been missing, reading through Schneer and also the previous components of this lecture. One thing that's been missing from the conversation so far is that of the user's perceptions of rewards. Okay, to fully understand a user's reactions to risk and uncertainty, we need to understand their perceptions and expectations of rewards. Again, notice I'm emphasizing expectations and expected rewards. Brings us back to expectancy valence theories of motivation. What do we think or what do we anticipate is going to happen as a function of our behavior? Here's a perhaps mundane, but I would argue non-trivial example. You're preparing a meal and you have it almost done, and you notice that the expiration date has passed on one of the key ingredients. Let's say the meat is a couple days overdue. Okay, everything's almost done. You're about to brown the meat, put it all together, and have your meal. Do you continue cook and eat the meal even though the expiration date has passed? Okay. The reward here is that, well, you can eat in a timely manner and you eat what you're preparing and you want to eat. Okay. May not have anything else readily available, so that's the reward. You get to eat now in a timely manner. The uncertain loss is you might get sick, so what do you do? Okay. My wife and I have different reactions to this. A couple of days past expiration dates, I'm like, it's probably fine. She has a hard and steady rule. Okay. But this is the notion of balance, perceived danger, perceived rewards. What do we get out of acting versus what are the potential losses? This balance that we perceive is going to be the determinant of our behavioral intentions. What do we decide to do? This brings up something that is alluded to in the Adams article. That is risk homeostasis theory. Risk homeostasis theory argues that people have a targeted level of risk, sort of a thermostat setting, a baseline, if you will. This is the level of risks they are willing to assume given expected rewards or magnitude of loss associated with an activity. Think about learning to ski. You probably, if you've done that, you're perhaps very cautious at first. You're concerned about falling and getting hurt. Okay? With practice, the concerns about the losses decrease. Okay? But also, if you stay in the bunny slope, the rewards aren't there. So you start to push the envelope to get that feeling of a rush. Okay? The notion that, losses are not as severe, push the envelope, get more of the reward. Again, find that balance. You don't immediately go from the bunny slope to the expert. You go from the bunny slope to the intermediate slope. And eventually to the expert, but you continue to sort of balance the perceived risk of loss and the perceived reward. So the homeostatic principle at work here is that risk-taking increases as perceived magnitude of loss decreases or expected rewards increase. Okay. The implication of homeostasis is that basically any change made to the intrinsic risk in an environment may be negated by behavioral adjustments within the environment. People take more risks when they perceive the environment is safer. Again, emphasis on perceptions here. So interventions designed to increase safety, perhaps by decreasing the amount of risk in an environment, may end up having little effect because people's behavior changes in such that they behave in a riskier manner. Always in the headlines this time of year is the injuries or fatalities from skiing. It's always seems to be some celebrity that has a skiing accident. It gets written up, noticed, and published by the media this time of year. Most recently was the race car driver. I'm blanking on his name. Don't really follow NASCAR race car driving, but famous race car driver was off skiing in the Alps and went off trail and hit a tree despite wearing a helmet. Is seriously injured. The point is that there's been studies done year in and year out that have shown that requiring skiers to wear helmets does not necessarily increase or does not decrease the fatality rate or the rate of serious injury. The argument that some make is that requiring skiers to wear helmets may increase their willingness to go faster. And so that when you're hitting a tree at a faster speed, the helmet may not make much of a difference. I pulled this quote from a recreational blog that I found, a mountain biker, actually. I think it sort of captures this notion of risk homeostasis. He's talking about going down. Here, let's just read it. Two different days, I pull up to the second half of the bobsled trail. This is a high-speed downhill mountain bike trail filled with fun features and easy outs. One day, I pull on my intense 6.6 with a full-face helmet, long pants, and body armor. Not quite sure I understand what intense 6.6 is, but you can just sort of see the guy dressed in body armor, basically, the helmet, going down the trail. The other day, I pull up on my epic carbon race bike. Okay, that's probably not as durable of a bike, in full spandex, but no armor. How do you think my behavior will change as I charge down the trail? Does the big trail bike with big tires, helmet, and armor provide additional safety? Well, yes. But since things are more safe, I double my speed and take the car jump, the big double, and the 12-foot drop at the end, effectively increasing my risk dramatically. Okay, and actually he goes on and comments in this blog that it's the level of risk he assumed is greater than the safety added by the body armor, if you will. And I think it's a sort of symptomatic a little bit of the extreme sports culture. The problem is that athletes probably push the perceived acceptable risk line much farther than they would have previously without the additional safety. It's sort of like if you increase your safety 2 times, you're probably increasing your risk 5 times. It seems. Okay, so but anyway, this blog entry I thought captured this notion of risk homeostasis. I'm safer now. I'm going to take bigger risks. So two elements or two components, two concepts are at work here: risk compensation and risk adjustment. Risk compensation plays a central role in risk homeostasis. As I said, after a change in the environment, the level of risk is reassessed and then reinserted at a level which the person was originally comfortable. So if the environment becomes more dangerous, I will lower my risk. If it becomes more safe, I raise my risk. So people tend to adjust their behavior in response to the perceived level of risk. Related to that is the notion of risk adjustment. I've talked to you about Tom Vanderbilt's work in the past. The crux of his research is that we routinely adjust the risk we are willing to take as the expected benefit grows. And the example that I've given in previous lectures is that drivers are waiting to take the left-hand turn accept smaller gaps in traffic the longer they wait. They take greater risk the longer they have to wait, presumably because there's a greater benefit to moving. Okay? There's a cost to standing still. So again, that with greater perceived benefit, the more risk we're willing to take. So this finally gets us to sort of policy implications. In general, there are 2 approaches to safety policy. Okay, and I'll use car safety here as an example, but it applies to any sort of safety, including internet safety. First is to attempt to improve safety by minimizing or alleviating the consequences of risky behavior. So for car safety, it's wearing seatbelts, making them mandatory, installing airbags, crash standards for vehicles, wider, safer roads would all fall under this approach. This approach, in essence, seeks to forgive people for a moment of inattention or carelessness. Okay, let's design out of the environment the risk. All right, so change the environment. The second approach is to attempt to improve safety by making the consequences of unsafe or imprudent behavior more severe. For car safety, this approach would include things such as speed bumps, narrow street passages, and fines for violations. This is far from forgiving, and in fact, this approach threatens people into adopting safe behavior because inattention or carelessness may bring about negative or dire outcomes. Okay. Again, Tom Vanderbilt talks about it. It's this very interesting book on traffic safety. He talks about towns in the Netherlands who have actually redesigned their town squares to make them less safe, take out traffic control. The argument that the town planners make is that when out-of-towners come in, they They don't know what's going on. It's unfamiliar to them. And the natural response is to slow down, to be more cautious. Um, and, and hence they've never had any accidents or any problems in the redesign of their towns in this way. A similar argument is made. There's a small little college down in Florida. There's a very narrow, this entryway was a very narrow street built back probably in the 50s when streets were narrow and lined with trees. And the college has grown. Students walk across the street often. And there's been some trustees who argue we've got to redesign the street to make it safer. Vanderbilt's argument was, the question was, has there ever been an accident here? And said, no, never had an accident in 50 years. And they said, well, what happens when cars go down here? Well, they drive very slowly. Okay? The trees, the narrow streets, the pedestrians force people to pay attention and be careful. Vanderbilt's argument was that, well, if you widen the street, they may go faster. You may be more likely to have an accident. I'm not advocating for that approach, but I'm just sort of saying those are the two different approaches. The one would be to try to make it safer. The second approach is to try to make people more prudent. Fact of the matter is, neither approach is likely to reduce the injury rate if people adapt their behavior to environmental changes. Okay, in the first approach, people may act riskier, okay, because of the safer conditions. In the second, they may not recognize the risk and not reduce risk-taking enough. I keep thinking of this town square in the Netherlands where you get somebody very unfamiliar with the area come, barreling along and not pay attention and not slow down and go right through the town square. So I'm not sure either approach, has the upper hand here. There's problems with both. Okay. So there's some discussion questions, and I'm going to post these on on Blackboard discussion. What are the implications of risk compensation and risk adjustment for organizations trying to protect their information, for information security? Should they continue to invest in firewalls, virus protection? Should they make a safer system? What will that do? What's the implications for the users? Will they be less vigilant? What should they tell their employees about the security measures? And are there effective deterrence methods? Okay. So I think before just saying we're going to make these changes, these safety changes, it's important to think, or security changes, it's important to think about how are people likely to respond to them. And risk compensation research and risk homeostasis theory argues they need to think in particular about the expected rewards or perceived rewards from their actions. Okay, good. Okay, that concludes the Module 2, Unit 3 lecture on risk perceptions. Make sure you do the readings, look at the discussion board and add to discussions as you see fit. And also assignment 2 will be posted. Thanks.